welcome to Carren's Couch. How exciting! I can't wait to share my guest with you today. She is somebody absolutely stunning. I mean, I'm looking at her right now and she's super, super fabulous. Big spunk. You guys are all going to want to know more about who she is, and I'm just going to build it up just a little bit. A little bit of suspense, a little bit of curiosity. Stop it! Today, what I decided to do was go down the path of diet. Now, hello! Is there 100 diets out there? Are there 1,000 different ways of eating? And I personally have had my own journey, and if you've been on my blog, chances are you feel really sorry for me, because I've written heaps of blogs about Carren's epic eating journey. So if you haven't been onto my blog, you better go across there now, because there's like 10 blogs on there about how I've been through all kinds of hell with my digestion, all kinds of hell with food allergies, all kinds of, I guess even more hell with my mindset around food. Because here's what I did, which is why I decided to do today's show on diet. This is what I used to do. I would eat food, and it was food that I felt I really wanted. You know, chocolates, chips, ice cream, cake, cupcakes. Give me cupcakes. I love the icing on the top. Is that bad? So I would eat the cupcakes, but then about a minute or minutes later, I'd start to feel really sick in the stomach. Not only did I feel sick, I'd also start to get fluffy. And I always knew if I could poke myself and my fingers sunk into my flesh, I was inflamed. Now, I knew the cupcakes were doing that, right? So I knew that's what that was. But I'd feel sick straight afterwards. Now, was that gluten intolerance? Was that wheat intolerance? I don't really know. But it kind of made me think that maybe what I was eating wasn't quite that good for me. Maybe what I was doing wasn't quite that good for me. But I couldn't stop myself. I couldn't stop myself for reaching for the cupcake or the chocolate or the chips. I couldn't stop it. And as long as I tried, as hard as I tried, didn't work. So I reckon I had a food addiction, a sugar addiction. And I would always have a food hangover, although I didn't know that's what it was at the time. So I went through all of this journey and this trauma and this tragedy. And then I found a way of eating that included a lot of meat. A lot of meat. Now, I don't know if you guys know, chances are you do, but I'm the world's biggest animal lover. So when I see a cow, I just want to hug it. I don't want to eat it. And when I see a chicken, I just want to go and play with it. I don't want to eat it. And it makes me so sad. So what would happen as I was eating all of this meat for, you know, I'd have bacon for breakfast and chicken for lunch or tuna and then steak for dinner with vegetables and, you know, all the usual. I would look at my plate and my plate would make me sad. And looking at it thinking, oh, everybody says I have to eat it. They tell me I need to eat it. So I'm eating it, but I just can't bear the thought that I'm eating an animal. That would make me upset as well. So after about, 15 years of all of this, I was getting fatter and fatter and fatter and fatter until even tomatoes upset my stomach. Lettuce upset my stomach. Everything upset my stomach. Because as I would eat the food, I would have a conversation with myself about what I was doing to myself and what I was doing to the animals, and that affected me. So I thought today it would be really important for us to get really clear on what are some of the best ways of eating. What is important to us as a human being? What do we need to be able to fuel our bodies? What works? What totally doesn't work? What we can do to help ourselves? Because I know on social media when I'm putting posts up there, there's lots of different schools of thought about what we should eat, what we shouldn't eat. I mean, I don't know, I've read tons of books on sweet poison, on wheat belly, and all these different people out there who've got different points of view. So you guys all know I've chosen to go vegan, and you know, lately I've been flirting with the raw vegan thing. So it's kind of been a bit of a journey for me, and the way I look at food now is it's always going to be a journey. So if I might change the way that I eat down the track, who knows? But I think the most important thing is education, research, and information. So today I've got somebody extraordinary that we've traveled all the way over to America to get. The amazing Nell Stephenson is joining us on the couch today. Now, Nell is currently at LA Airport. So she's fortunate she's sitting in the guest lounge. So hopefully it'll be nice and quiet there behind Nell. But thank you so much for joining us, Nell. What a treat to have you on with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
You've got one of the most impressive resumes when it comes to nutrition and I guess really getting the message out there. One of the things that really drew us to Nell was that she wants to change the way that America eats. And I dare say you could very easily cross that over to Australia as well. You know, the standard American diet is just as sad as the standard Australian diet. So
I agree.
Yeah, tell us about you. Tell us about your journey. Tell us about what makes you this powerhouse.
Well, thank you for the kind words. I have been following the paleo diet for about 9 years, and my own journey, similar to yours, grew out of being frustrated with what I was eating and why was I feeling sick all the time, because what I was eating was food that I thought was healthy for me. I had grown up with a hippie mom, so no sugar, no preservatives, lots of fresh veggies, but certainly eating my fair share of whole grains and beans and that type of thing. So, I was eating that type of diet, which was certainly healthier than standard American. But little did I know I was actually doing quite a bit of damage to my body. So as I grew up from having stomach aches pretty much every day as a child, which were just annoying, it got worse and worse to the point where I was in my early 20s and I was sick all the time. Going to the hospital, going to GI specialists. Nobody was asking what I was eating, and it just didn't make any sense. At that point, I had already completed my degree in exercise physiology and nutrition, so I knew that there had to be something going on with regard to what I was eating. I just couldn't figure out what, because I wasn't going to fast food, I wasn't eating candy, I was eating foods that I thought were good for me. So when it got really bad and I was going to the emergency room regularly and nobody was asking what I was eating, and I was, at best I was given a suggestion from one of the doctors that I probably needed Prozac because there was nothing wrong with me.
No way, really?
Yeah. It was all in my head, apparently.
No way.
Seriously. At one point, one specialist finally tested me for celiac disease, and fortunately I came back negative, after which point he said, well, you don't have celiac disease, so you should not stop eating gluten. If you stop eating gluten, you're going to compromise your diet because the foods that contain gluten are so rich in other vitamins and fiber that you'll need, so it's really a bad idea, which it didn't make sense to me. So I was just frustrated, sick of being sick at such a young age, and I went online and started researching and found out that people can have a latent allergy to gluten, which can happen at any age, whether you're an infant or age 80. It can be triggered by stress, trauma, or infection. And I later began to coin it a tipping point, because I do believe everybody has a tipping point at which point your body just says, enough, can't do the gluten anymore. So I cut it out and started feeling better within 3 days. And that was all the information I needed. Proof was in the proverbial pudding. I followed the gluten-free diet for about a year, and as an athlete, I still was pretty heavy on the gluten-free bagels and gluten-free pastas, thinking I needed it for my training. But at that point, I felt better, but not fantastic. And again, I was only in my mid-20s, and I thought all my life I was eating something that I thought was really good for me, which was whole wheat and whole grains, and they were actually making me quite sick. I wonder if there's anything else that could fit that same bill. Sure enough, I went back online, learned about the paleo diet, and it just made sense to me that we should be focusing on eating a large amount of local fresh produce, balanced out with natural proteins and fats, and avoiding things in package and wrappers, and also avoiding grains, dairy, and legumes. And similar to you, I had experimented with lots of different types of eating strategies, partly because I wanted to be lean as an athlete, and partly because I wanted to feel good. And I was vegan for 2 years. And the interesting thing to note about that is that there's actually quite a bit of similarity between true paleo, which is what I've begun to call it, and vegan, because they're both plant-based. One of the major misconceptions about paleo is that it's the same as Atkins, or that it's an all-protein diet, or it's an all-raw meat diet, and that's just not accurate. But as I got to the point where I'm at now, I've been paleo myself for 9 years. I work with clients all around the world, helping them implement the paleo principles to their lifestyle, and I've just seen remarkable changes in people, from losing tremendous amounts of weight, clearing up their skin conditions, being able to, under their doctor's supervision, stop taking their different types of medication for diabetes or hypertension. It's been really amazing. And I do honestly think it's a really fantastic way to eat.
It's amazing that you say that, Nell, because I've gone through lots of different paleo recipe books over the years, because prior to, moving to a vegan lifestyle, I was paleo under the instruction of some fitness trainers that I was working with. And true paleo, as you say, is very plant-based. So I would, and still to this day, I find a lot of my recipes come from the paleo cookbooks. What exactly is paleo? What's the distinction that makes paleo different from, say, the caveman diet or the hunter-gatherer diet? Specifically, what is it? And to what extent are we eating proteins? I had a friend of mine who was a personal trainer who said that he was paleo and he was eating at least 3 kilos of meat in a day.
Oh my goodness.
I know. And
I think when I say true paleo, I've started to use that phrase because I'm trying to set true paleo as presented by the work of my mentor, Dr. Lauren Cordain, as far as what it really is and some of the different permutations that are coming out that kind of defeat the purpose. But the point of the paleo diet is to mimic what our ancestors ate in easy to find foods that are available to us without actually having to go hunting or fishing ourselves, that we can find easily at the farmer's market or the grocery store. So it doesn't mean that you actually, again, have to go hunt and fish and pick berries by yourself. Certainly you can if you are inclined to do so, but it's not necessary. It's just focusing on fresh, whole, hopefully organic if it's in the budget, food that's available to you locally and balanced, and it's just an incredibly easy way to eat. It's very common sense with no tricks or no gimmicks.
Yeah, right. And so in terms of the protein, it's all animal protein?
Yes, I mean, you do get a little bit of protein. There are trace amounts of proteins in some of the vegetables and the fruits that we eat, but mostly you are getting protein from wild fish, grass-fed meats, pastured poultry, that type of meat, versus an approach where you're focusing on commercially available bacon and poor quality meats where the animals are raised inhumanely. And kind of to hit on the point you said earlier, one of the reasons I was vegan was also for ethical reasons. So it was a huge transition for me to be eating paleo. It certainly did not happen overnight, and animal welfare is still a concern. And the way that I found balance for myself is actually just to make sure that every time I buy fish or chicken or beef or anything, it's coming from a reliable source that's local, that's raised the animals humanely. I will not ever buy factory farmed chicken or meat because it's on sale, because that's actually perpetuating a really horrible situation we have here in the U.S. I'm not sure how bad it is in Australia, but the inhumane treatment of animals is appalling, and I don't ever want to support that. But I do think that supporting the small ranchers who are trying to do the right thing actually helps in a good way, because you're trying to show people that it can be done this way and that there are other options versus buying those poorly raised animals and contributing to those practices.
Last week we had Dr. Will Tuttle on the show, and we explored his book called The World Peace Diet. Now, whether you're interested in vegan or paleo, it's kind of irrelevant in this particular point. He made a real point about how factory farming is so detrimental not only to the sustainability of the environment, but also to the sustainability of the human, because of the sickness and the antibiotics and all of the way that the animals are slaughtered, and it's just the toxicity that runs through the meat based on factory farming is significant. I think, and the point that you raised there really strikes me as curious, because you were saying that it's important to have grass-fed meat rather than grain-fed meat, because even if we're allergic to wheat or we're allergic to gluten and then we go and eat meat thinking we're doing the right thing, if the meat is grain-fed, we're still getting the same chemical reaction in the body. Is that right?
It's totally right. And I mean, it's just not natural for the animals. It's not natural for our planet. It just doesn't make sense on any level, except if you look at it from a financial perspective, where, if you look at a vendor who's implementing inhumane farming practices and they're really just, their goal is to create more meat, then you see things like chickens that weigh 5 or 6 pounds that have been eating corn and pellets and who knows what else. But chicken isn't supposed to weigh 5 or 6 pounds. And it's always interesting when I take a client to a farmer's market and show them that a pastured hen is tiny. It weighs about 2 pounds, 2 or 3 pounds. And that hen has been foraging and eating worms and bugs and things in the soil, which it's supposed to eat, versus a factory farmed chicken, which weighs, 3 to 4 to 5 times the weight. And it's been fattened up. And that's another reason why when I'm talking with clients and they're talking about how they don't know if they'll be able to give up their bread and their pasta and these other things, which really are nothing more than fillers. There's no nutritional value in them, and it does a great job at fattening up an animal, and it will do a great job at fattening up a person as well as make them sick. So I try to position that to people if they're looking for reasons to cut out the bread.
I love that. It does a great job of fattening up the animals, and it's going to fatten you up too. No wonder. No wonder we have such an obese, society, or an obesity problem, because we're living on grains, aren't we? I mean, it's a huge part of the Western diet.
And I think, you hit the nail on the head earlier, too, when you talked about the sugar and the sugar addiction. I think that's not at all an exaggeration. And I have clients who cannot implement the idea of everything in moderation because it is a drug. And for some people, that one cookie is never going to be one cookie. It's going to be a box of cookies. And sometimes it's a week of eating a box of cookies. And that's the type of thing you have to cut cold turkey. But I think a lot of people also don't realize it's not just eating candy and things that are obviously full of white sugar, but just eating refined grains like white bread and white pasta and that kind of thing. That's also sugar, and that also is going to perpetuate somebody's likelihood of becoming diabetic and obese and having all sorts of other health issues. So it's just really bad news. We need to really focus on fresh vegetables, deep, rich colors. Ideally, if you can have all the colors of the rainbow gracing your plate over the course of the day, you'd be in a great position.
That sounds beautiful.
Yeah.
That sounds beautiful. I must say, I do enjoy that about the way that I eat nowadays. In just what you said, my kitchen does look like this absolute rainbow of beauty when I come back, because I shop at the local farmers market when I'm home and not traveling. And I do find that a bit of a struggle when I'm traveling, but I really try and make up for it when I get home. It's like a rainbow. It's just this great burst of color, and it's beautiful. But it's interesting. I've got a couple of people that I've worked with over the past have said, I'm totally off sugar. I'm not doing sugar at all. Yet I will see breads and wraps and whole wheat pastas and those sorts of things in their cupboards. They're thinking that that's not going to convert to sugar inside of the body, which just enhances the addiction. And
it absolutely does. And I think that's if you talk about somebody somebody's interested in becoming paleo, and sometimes they want to do it in stages. So maybe they're coming from a background where they're eating a lot of fast food, a lot of candy, and the idea of going completely paleo overnight is too overwhelming.
Yeah.
And so that person might want to start gluten-free for week 1, but they're still eating the other things, and then week 2 they're also going to cut out dairy, something like that. I think that's fine. However, the caveat is there are certain things that I feel people should cut out right away, and white sugar is definitely one of those. Because I don't hesitate comparing it to a drug, and you would never hear somebody who is trying to battle a drug addiction be counseled that they can have just a little bit. You've just got to stop it. And sugar has an opiate-like effect on the brain, and that's what happens when people that have the sugar addiction have a little bit, and at that moment in time, it seems like a really good idea to have more. So that's one thing that I feel people should just cut cold turkey, and then if you want to transition the rest of the way into it, I think that's fine. And ultimately, what I like to present to people is the idea to try it at 100% for 30 days in the real approach, the true paleo approach, and see how you feel. And like you said before, I think it is a journey, and sometimes we try different ways of eating and we feel better in some ways, and that works for a while, and then we try something else. And I'm very glad that I was vegan for 2 years, because I took away quite a bit from it. And now that I can speak with clients that are vegan or that are thinking about becoming paleo and share my own experience, I think it's just invaluable.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a necessity, if to have been on your own journey and to know the differences between what certain foods do to the body. And obviously you're an expert in that, so we're so grateful that you're here sharing all the information that you have with us. So let's explore something that I'm really curious about and super interested to get your take on this, given that you are, such a powerhouse in this movement. There are lots of different diets, and I do agree that, eating is absolutely a journey.
Yes.
Finding what works best for us is a journey. Would you say that paleo is the best for everybody, or do you think it's a case of finding what works for you and then going with that? What are your views around that horses for courses versus one specific way?
I think it's a combination of things. I do, from the bottom of my heart, believe that we as humans are meant to be eating this way. However, I feel I'm a bit less dogmatic than I was when I began doing what I do. And it only ever came from a place of passion and seeing how so many people can heal from being sick to overweight, and what a world of good it does.
Yeah.
But I also realize that sometimes I can be a little too passionate, and it can come across as dogmatic, and I don't want to scare people off from giving it a try.
Yeah.
So, at the bottom line is, like I said a couple weeks ago on the Dr. Oz show, if you're taking somebody who's coming from the standard American diet, eating a lot of highly refined, high in sugar, high in sodium foods, and you're at least getting them partly there, I think that's fantastic. So, you know, it might, for some people, it might be just as simple as just adding some vegetables before they even take anything away. So I think it's a work in progress. And I think because we're talking about reaching so many people as a whole, I think if we can get everybody eating healthier as a starting point, I think that's the position. And yes, I think everybody could benefit from doing the paleo diet. But, again, some people find that they go paleo for 30 days and they test things and they decide that certain things are something that they want to have now and then, like going home to grandma's house for the Christmas time and you have to have a piece of her pie, that type of thing. On the flip side, sometimes people try things and they realize that thing that they used to eat all the time without really thinking about it actually made them very sick.
Yeah.
For example, they used to love pizza and they go paleo for 30 days and they go back and have the pizza and it tastes a little bit saltier than they remember, and because they've stopped salting their food, and they wake up the next day with a migraine headache from the gluten and a bloated belly from the dairy. Then they can decide, okay, is this really worth it? Do I want to make myself feel this way? And for me, that's exactly how I've been able to stay paleo, is after having been sick for 20 something years and realizing what the culprit was, it immediately made anything with gluten completely unattractive. In fact, I wrote a blog post about it and I called it the cardboard phase, to talk about how I'd rather eat a piece of cardboard than a cake, because I know that if I eat something with gluten, I will feel so sick for at least a few days. It's just not worth it. There's enough beyond our control that we can get sick by accident, like getting food poisoning or something like that. I don't see why I would purposely want to eat something that I know will make me feel very sick.
And that's a really important distinction that you make there. Either way, if you were going to eat cardboard or you were going to eat, a cupcake, either way it's empty calories, right? So it's whether whether you really want to make yourself that sick. But I think, I've spent most of my life overweight, and the interesting thing that I've found since being on this whole journey, and this is why I'm just so resonating with everything that you're saying right now, and I know that our listeners and our viewers are doing exactly the same thing, is that it's like a frog in boiling water, right? You don't really know what you've been swimming in until you're out of it. You don't really...
That's a good analogy.
Yeah, you don't know the pain that you're in. You throw a frog into cold water and gently turn up the heat, and he doesn't realize he's going to boil until it's all over, But
That's awful.
If you throw a frog in boiling water, he jumps straight out. It was an analogy that I think my science teacher told me when I was in year 10. But it's an interesting concept, because as we are just eating the standard diet, we don't know any better until somebody like you comes along that is such a powerhouse, that is so passionate and has such a massive vision for changing the way that we see food and relate to food, that we start to question, well, hang on a second, should I really be eating those biscuits? Should I really be eating that? Is that really helpful or healthy for me? And we don't know until we stop that we've actually been sick all along.
That's exactly right. And that's what I think, a lot of people say, oh, I don't need to change my diet, I feel fine, but they don't realize that their fine standard has gotten so low.
Yeah.
They have a headache, kind of a mild headache every day. Their digestion isn't great. They're not sleeping great, but that's normal and they're used to it. So that's their definition of I feel fine, which is unacceptable. I don't think any of us should settle with feeling that way. And it's kind of heartbreaking when I have clients that are of a certain age and they'll say, oh, I went to the doctor and my knees are hurting. And the doctor just said, well, you are such and such age. So that's just part of aging. That's not acceptable. We need to look at what we're eating as step number one, because food can absolutely contribute to having joint pain as well as every other malady in the body.
It's interesting, and I want to go down this path with you, with your experience having worked with so many people around the world, including Australia and New Zealand. What impact do you think that thought has on our digestion, given that 90% of our feel-good neurotransmitters are created in the gut? What do you think the impact of that is? I know for myself, how I feel about the food that I eat, it definitely affects the way that it reacts inside of my body.
I don't know how to really answer that. I'm sure it does affect it. I wouldn't be able to comment on what percentage affects it, but I think absolutely what's in our mind plays a huge role in everything that we do. I mean, certainly if we decide in advance that something will make us feel a certain way, we can definitely skew, I think, how our body reacts to it. So I think that's a very significant thing to consider.
Yeah, I've recently been doing lots of study on that whole mind-body connection thing, and really just using food as my primary source of research. And it's been an amazing trip to discover how, as you say, the way that we think about the food then sets up the way that the body assimilates it. And I think that that's a really important component to consider. And when you relate that back to paleo, if we know that we're eating fresh, wholesome, whole foods, clean proteins that are grass-fed, that have come from sustainable farming practices, that we can put into our body and know that it's doing the best for us, versus eating what we have here in Australia. I don't know if you guys have them in the States, as Tim Tams. Like,
I don't have that.
We don't have that? Okay, so think of your most chocolatey, fabulously chocolatey biscuit that's filled with everything that can mess you up in a major way.
Okay.
So if you think about eating that clean food, naturally you're going to be thinking that it's going to be good for you. And even if you don't want to eat it because you're still suffering a sugar addiction, and you follow it up with a Tim Tam, you know the difference. We all know the difference mentally. And from a mindset perspective, we know the difference. We know the contrast, and then that does obviously affect the way that it assimilates in our body. So I think it's a huge part of us becoming more aware. If anything else, becoming more aware of what we put in our mouths affects what goes on up here, and it affects what goes on down here. And I think
absolutely. I think so many people don't put that together. You know, even if somebody's not actually physically feeling sick, but they're just having a hard time concentrating at work, or they're feeling that 4 o'clock fatigue, or they're having a hard time sleeping, you know, I bet they're probably having sugar crashes and spikes and dips all day long. And that's just a function of starting the day with what I call a grain festival, getting up and having, even if it's not as extreme as having some of the cereals that are marketed to our children, but you know, a bagel or oatmeal or all these other grain-based foods, that's just not the best way to start the day. We need protein and we need veg at any meal. There's no such thing as dinner food or lunch food or breakfast food. It's just food. And if we start the day with a balance, then we're far more likely to have balanced energy levels. And actually, you know, this is something that I think would be appealing to large companies, is that if they can get their employees eating this way, they're going to have better mental productivity and better focus and less sick days, and that the whole 9 yards.
What are some of the biggest hurdles that we're facing as humanity when it comes to our food? What are you seeing that the hurdles we've got to jump?
I think specifically with regard to getting people eating healthier in the U.S., there's just a lot of bad information out there. We're still taught that we should follow the My Plate, which still includes dairy, and not only dairy, but low-fat dairy, which is even worse than full-fat dairy.
That's a whole other show, you know.
Yes, absolutely.
We might get you back on for that one.
I think a lot of people are stuck in the mentality of that I went through in the early 90s as a teenager, which was low-fat and fat-free, and people were frightened of fat. They're frightened of eating too many calories. They're afraid of gaining weight, which is understandable because so many people are overweight. But we're following this model that's just not working, yet we continue to try and follow it. And, you know, interestingly, the USDA's title sponsors are food companies that would kind of be alarming if you would think about the fact that it's Coca-Cola and PepsiCo and Kellogg's and General Mills and the Dairy Council. So it's no wonder that those organizations who are sponsoring the USDA are putting up a message that we need to eat these foods. And it's really, I often joke and say there's no kale lobby, there's no money in health, there's no organization that can fund these studies that show that all these things that are good for us are really good for us, because I think there's no money to be made in it, which is a very harsh and sad reality.
You know, that it's almost tear-jerking that. I always say there's no bucks in broccoli. And I think it's the same thing, you know. Without getting into conspiracy theories around that, it's hard not to actually even go there. Because it exists in almost every country globally, where financial gain and financial profit actually drives what's made available to us. You know, depending on our socio-economic standing, that really determines the quality of the food that we're able to eat. And I don't know. I just don't know. I don't understand why. But I also get that people like you are part of this massive change in the movement that are waking us up. And I
hope to be.
Yeah.
You know, and like you're saying, I don't know what the answer is. It's not as simple as just telling everybody to eat healthy foods, because like you're saying, I mean, the harsh reality is that it is much easier for a family to eat crappy, excuse my French.
No, you're allowed to say that.
But it's much easier for a family that's living on a very restricted income to eat poor quality or no quality food, and they cannot afford things like an apple or broccoli and that type of thing, and it's heartbreaking. And not surprisingly, that family gets sick and gets overweight and then needs medication and has to rely on pharmaceutical prescriptions, and then they get sicker from the side effects, and it's just this horrible vicious cycle. And I don't know what the answer is, but I hope to be a part of, like you're saying, the bigger picture, maybe with some kind of a movement where there's a lot of people collaborating to educate and try to create programs where people can have access to fresh foods and have choices to not have to go to the fast food restaurants and eat the junk food.
You know, here in Australia, we've got this concept, and I'm sure you guys have got it over there. Chances are we stole it from you, but the whole community gardens, where there's one particular fellow, and he's actually taking the nature strip in front of people's homes that's owned by our councils or government. And he's turning those into gardens so that the whole community can get involved in tending the gardens, and the whole community can then, you know, reap the reward of those gardens, which for those people who are still stuck in that cycle, I guess, based on their economic level, they're stuck in that cycle of medication, you know, versus quality food.
Right.
But really, I guess, you know, if they had the quality food, they maybe wouldn't need the medication. So his whole intention is to try to break that cycle, which I think is it's so inspiring. It's just amazing.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, you know, I feel like we could keep talking, and I know I say that on every show, but really, we've got to make these shows longer.
I know. Well, that's a good sign. Better than running out of material and sitting there saying nothing. That would be a bad sign.
Yeah. Well, look, this has been so insightful, and I think to have somebody like yourself who is a part of this movement and really focusing on pushing clean paleo, you know, back to nature, back to basics, without all of the packaged stuff, without all of the stuff that's part of, you know, what we would call evolution and progress. I really wonder. And, you know, when you look at us as a society, we are sicker, we are fatter, we are more unwell, we have more diseases, we have more problems and issues in society with stress and depression. We have more to fight than what we have to simply thrive on and enjoy. We've got to look at, I guess, where our food comes from. And
Absolutely.
I relate to food very much as, you know, the way that we ingest food and we take food in is the same way that we relate and ingest to life. Because food is life. Food is life sustaining. And if we're not participating in life and milking it for all the juice and all the magic that it has to offer, then I think we need to start by looking at our food as a way to address that issue. Do you think? No?
I totally think so. I think food it's so obvious that it's almost too obvious. People don't understand it. It's, you know, the old saying, food is medicine.
Yeah.
And I think medicine, you know, people do get sick and they go to the doctor and they get a pill, and they get maybe they feel a little bit better, but they have side effects and they get more pills. And then, you know, months or years elapse and they finally go to somebody that's considered an alternative practitioner because they're looking at food, and that's sort of strange, and we don't really know if that's something that needs to be considered, and it's certainly not covered by insurance. It's just it's completely backwards. I think that should be step one. And certainly I'm not saying that we should not have medication at all, but I'm just saying that I don't think giving a pill to somebody should be step one all the time. I think it needs to be later down the road.
Yeah, and therein lies another show where I think it's important that we do address that. You know, the alternate therapies versus the medical model. I think that's really important to explore that, but not on this show. We're out of time. We're out of time. So, Nell, thank you so much for joining us. Would you be happy for us to have you back on the show again later on down the track?
I had a lovely time. I'd love to come back.
Oh, great. So if our listeners and our viewing audience wants to get more of you, where can we find you?
You can visit my website, which is paleoista.com. You can follow me on Twitter.
Paleoista?
Paleoista.
.com?
Like paleo plus fashionista. Yep. My
great.
Twitter handle is @Nell Stephenson and Facebook/Paleoista.
Oh, fantastic. And Nell, you also have been the author of a couple of books, haven't you?
Yes, I had the honor to co-write the Paleo Diet Cookbook with Dr. Lauren Cordain, and I wrote my own book, Paleoista, which came out in 2012, which is kind of a guide that I wish I could have found when I was new to the paleo diet.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. Well, here's a surprise for all of our listeners and all of our viewers. As usual, we always love to give stuff away, especially from our guests, because I think you've had a taste of an expert and it's really important that we help disseminate the information. So we are going to have 5 copies of Paleoista, and we're also going to have 5 copies of Nell Stephenson's and Dr. Lauren Cordain's cookbook, and we're going to be giving them away. So make sure that you check out our Facebook page and you send us a message and tell us why we should be giving you those copies of the books, and we'll make sure that we get those out to you. So we're going to have 5 copies. So Nell Stephenson, what an honor. Thank you so much for joining us here on Carren's Couch today. It's been enlightening, it's been informative, it's been fun. I feel like I've met a soul sister. So thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute treat.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you, Carren.
It's my pleasure. And for all of you guys out there who've enjoyed the show, make sure that you go to our Facebook page at allthews.facebook.com/Carren's Couch and post your comments. And you can also post your comments on this website page all the way down the bottom, and that's at carrenscouch.com, where you can have a look for Nell Stephenson and post your comments and your thoughts about paleo lifestyle. Are you paleo? Have you tried paleo? What's been your eating journey? Both Nell and myself would love to hear from you and love to know more about what your thoughts are. So join us here again next week on Carren's Couch, where we dive deep into your unanswered questions. And we're going to see you then. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.